Good morning, everyone. This is Fred Zabonik. Michelle Williams is also on the line. Um, Welcome to the 2019 Asset Management Policy Webinar. Um, the requirement for this policy webinar is that every agency participate. So it's not every person that does asset management. Nobody's going to get in trouble if they don't attend this at this time. We know some folks have meetings and they cannot attend this. The good thing is that the webinar is being recorded and it will be put out on the Asset Management Services website. I would give it a few days. It takes a little while with our communications department to get that posted. Hopefully Friday would be a good time. And you'll notice when you first go in, the first page will, if it's last year's, it's going to say December 5th of 18, okay, versus November 20th of 19. One of the other things, so what should be happening right now, and hopefully it is for all of you, is that you're able to hear me on the phone and you're able to see the content of the webinar through the go-to site. We've had years past where some folks have technical issues where their agency will not allow them to go to the go-to site. And if that occurs, you definitely can either listen or you can go through the recording after it's posted on the website. Right now, everyone is muted. And what we're trying to do is just to limit the background noise so that we've had years past where we could hear noise in people's offices. So everyone is muted. The way to ask a question is to go through and click on the hand and raise your hand button. And Michelle will then make me aware of that, and she will unmute you so you can ask the question and the entire group can hear us. And then they can hear my answer. So that's where we're that's the process we're doing today. Now, as far as the outline of what we're doing here today, you should see that on your monitor. We will go through some of these items, and we go through them every year, like the Ohio Revised Code, basically what drives the bus. Then we'll touch on annual certification and the 2-year requirement for physical certification, which the next one's due in fiscal year 21. We'll go through inventory counts and what you do when assets are not found. And then the number 5 there, we'll go over assets that are permanently missing. We'll also go through the retirement of using disposal code does not meet threshold for the folks that use Oaks. There in number 7, we will go over the proper disposal codes to use for cell phone when you get rid of a cell phone. And we'll also touch on the OBM audits and what's important and how to properly record asset activity. Number 9 there, we will touch on employee wrongdoing if there's something that is suspected of someone's doing something illegal. We'll go through the cost thresholds for personal property and also for real property. Then we'll touch on the capital asset reporting criteria, which is different than non-capital assets. We'll touch on the licensed vehicles. We'll also go through the tagging of an asset and what you should do if you need to reorder tags. And then we'll touch on interagency transfers. We'll go through the custodian policy for shared equipment. Then we'll touch on something that's Oak specific with security access, because we get a lot of questions on there, and there's a policy as far as the Oaks users and how they go through to actually get new folks access to Oaks AM. Then we'll touch on the depreciation accuracy and how important that is for federal reporting and for the agencies that do federal reporting and for the agencies with their capital asset reporting. Then we'll touch on the service weapon because we have that question every year about the possibility of someone who retires being able to purchase their service weapon. And then the final thing we'll touch on are trade-ins. We have a lot of questions on trade-ins and how do you record that and with the asset record. Excuse me. So that's what we're going to touch on this morning. We're hoping to keep this to within an hour, and I will touch on some things very quickly, and other items I will go into great detail. And again, if there's a question, just use the hand icon to be unmuted. Okay, so I'm going on to page 1, and this is the Ohio Revised Code, the actual section 125-16. I am not going through this, okay, but this is what drives our bus. And this is basically that you have to certify your inventory activity every fiscal year by October 1st, okay? So we are happy to say that for fiscal year 19, everyone did certify by October 1st. So everybody is in compliance with the law, and that's one part of an audit that everybody will meet, and there won't be any issues there. Here on page 2, you will see a small picture of the certification form. Now, one of the things that people get confused on, and we have over 120 people right now on the webinar, okay? The thing with the certification, the annual certification of your inventory activity, that is done by the agency, okay? So if you you work at a division of DNR, or you're at an institution of DRC, or a different division of DAS or DMH, only one certification happens per agency, okay? So there may be a lot of people on the phone that will never have to do this, okay? But it is a requirement, and it's basically an online application that you go into, and you complete this form based off your year-end reports. And again, this is what needs to be done by October 1st every year. And this is just the second page, Schedule B there on the page 3 there, Schedule B. That is the second page of that report. That's specifically for any inventory activity that did not get entered in time, but you received it, or it happened before June 30th of the year. That would go into that page, Schedule B. Now, what you're looking at now on page 4 is the biennial physical inventory, and every agency has to take a physical inventory within a 2-year period. Every odd fiscal year is when you have to actually go into this certification site and fill out this page that's at the bottom here. And it's real easy. It's basically a date completed, and it's got a couple other, executive officer title of who's signing off this, saying, yes, on this date we took a physical inventory. So, again, every odd fiscal year is when you have to report it. Some agencies report this every year, and that's fine. And most agencies still do every other year, but just remember it's every odd fiscal year. So we just finished, back in June, we finished fiscal year 19. Okay, so now we're in fiscal year 20. So really, no agency is required to go into our site and fill this out at the end of this year. They're not required to. But by the end of fiscal year 21, they will have to. And if you took a physical count this fiscal year and fiscal year 20, and you don't do one in fiscal year 21, you're still in compliance with the law because you have to do it within that 2-year period. And that is, again, that's something that's in the Ohio Revised Code, required every odd fiscal year. Now I'm heading down to page 5. and you'll see some highlighted items there when assets cannot be found. And this states that upon a state employee recognizing that one or more assets cannot be found, the agency shall pursue an investigative review to find the asset. An investigative review may consist of a special review of documents, interviews with personnel, and/or special physical inventory. During this time, the asset may remain active on the agency's inventory. Now, some agencies, if they don't find something, will wait until the next time to do the physical and see if they find it the next time. There's nowhere in here that says you have a time frame on when you got to try to find it again. Some agencies take physical inventory every year, and if they don't find it in the second year, then they mark it as missing. But the point here is you should not go record your asset as missing if you just go out one time and try to find it. Because right here the policy states that you should do a secondary physical inventory or a secondary investigation, talk to coworkers in that area to find out what might have happened to the asset. Assets disposed as permanently missing. If you do code something as missing and in a subsequent physical inventory you find that item, you should immediately go into the asset system and change the status and reactivate the inventory record. And there are a handful of agencies that still do not use OAKS for their asset management, and those agencies that with their internal systems should have the ability to reactivate the asset. In OAKS, you definitely have the functionality to reactivate your asset so that it's reflective of your true representation of your inventory. One of the disposal codes that is used for in OAKS is a code that says does not meet the threshold. And basically what happens is there are some agencies that will lower their dollar threshold, and they've done that for years. Let's say it's $300. And then they realize, these items, the state threshold is $1,000 on non-sensitive items. So if they decide to change their internal threshold and go to the state threshold, then they can retire these assets as does not meet the threshold, because they really, technically, by the state policy, were never required to be inventory. Now, at the bottom of page 5 there, you see property disposal codes for cell phone, proper disposal codes for cell phone disposal. So if you send cell phones to Moby through eCycle, those should be considered scrapped because those get destroyed, okay? Versus sending them to Lighthouse ends up sending them back out here to surplus, to state surplus, and they will try to sell. So that would be retired by sale. Okay, that's the difference. Some agencies get rid of their cell phones one way, some get rid of their cell phones another way, and so these would be the different disposal codes you would use depending on which company and which process your agency does. Page 6, this is a pretty big one because OBM has provided us with several different things that they look at when they go to do an audit. And audits are scary and oh my goodness. And one of our goals here in our office with Michelle and I is that we're here to help you before, during, and after an audit. Okay, we've had times where the auditor is sitting right there, breathing down the person's neck, and they call us and they say, hey, we need help, proving something or whatever, showing some kind of documentation. But these items are not everything that they look at, but it's a lot of what they look at. And one of the big things they do is they're looking at that custodian field to make sure that it is up to date to who is responsible for the item. A lot of agencies get dinged on the custodian field, and that is, in Oaks, it's a required field. Okay, when you go to enter an asset, the custodian field is required. And you can go down and see a lot of these different types as far as the timeliness if you certify. So again, every agency is going to meet that audit perfectly because everyone's certified on or before October 1st of this year. This next section here with employee wrongdoing, this is really something that doesn't get updated that frequently, and you'll see the memo that is still in existence is from April 7th of 2011. Okay, but basically there are different scenarios in here of whether you're calling 911 or you're calling the highway patrol. Basically, you can use this as a reference if there's some kind of issue with your where you feel that someone is stealing or whatever. I definitely think you should communicate with your immediate supervisors, and maybe they take the ball and roll with it after that. But those are some steps that you could use if something like that's going on. Now, at the bottom of page 7, we have this as a requirement for all state agencies, whether you use Oaks or not. That initial police report must be electronically saved and attached to the asset record, whether it's in Oaks or an in-house system. Okay, there has to be some kind of link. So, there are times when an initial police report could be anywhere from 1 page to 3 pages. We've seen some that are 10 and 15 pages. Okay, you can attach those on the basic ad page right in Oaks. Okay, you save it to wherever you need to, whatever folder, and you can go into Oaks and click on the attachment icon on the basic ad page, and you can browse and find the document and attach it right in the basic ad. That is a requirement for all state agencies. Just the initial police report. You don't have to wait to find out what happened to the item or if the case was closed or whatever. We are just talking initial police report. Now we get into cost thresholds. And one of the things there at the top, and it says it's the agency, the Department of Administrative Services, including Asset Management Services Office in the General Services Division, our responsibility ends, and the state agency responsibility solely begins for state-owned assets not meeting the stewardship reporting cost threshold, and for all state-owned supply. So basically what that's saying is for all your low dollar amount, whether it's a calculator, anything that's under $1,000 that's not sensitive, or consumables like toner or bandages, those are your responsibility. Even though you're not reporting them in the asset system necessarily, they're still the responsibility of each agency. Now, as we go through here, I'm going to go through here kind of quickly, but the personal property equipment, okay, anything that is greater than $1,000 needs to be recorded. When you get down to number 2 there, the intangible personal property, that's basically software. Any software that exceeds 100,000 must be recorded, and that could be whether it's purchased or whether it's internally produced. If the cost of that software is greater than 100,000, it should be recorded in Oaks or an agency's in-house system. For firearms, firearms are recorded regardless of the cost. There, number 4, that's the sensitive property, and if that's at least $500, see, that's where the threshold changes. For non-sensitive, it's 1,000, but for sensitive items, it goes down to 500. And you'll see some of the categories there, like audiovisual equipment, communications, antiques, surveillance equipment, power tools. So those items, the threshold goes down to 500. Now, here in the section 5, which is highlighted with a blue font, that is for computing devices, okay? And so computing devices, regardless of the cost, those need to be recorded. And most of the cell phones these days are computing devices, okay? If somebody still has a phone only state phone, I don't know if we still have any. A couple years ago we did, but most of the phones are smartphones or droids or whatever, and those are considered computing devices. And whether you get them for $500 or $200, it doesn't matter. Regardless of the cost, those are considered computing devices, and they should be tracked as an inventory item. When you get into real property, and there are a handful of agencies that have land and buildings, land is recorded regardless of the acquisition cost. The same thing goes for easements. Whether you're a grantee or a grantor, regardless of the cost, easements must be recorded. And then you have where you get to land improvements. And land improvements, things like sidewalks and parking lot paving and retaining walls and lighting and fencing and other structures. Any land improvement that's greater than $15,000 must be recorded. When you get to renovations, and that's number 5, renovations to buildings, if the renovation is $100,000, more than $100,000, then it must be recorded. Now, there are some agencies that will take an $85,000 renovation to a building, and they'll put it in the asset system, and that's fine. It just should not be recorded as a capital asset because it's a volunteer asset. But any renovations that are greater than $100,000, it's a requirement that they be reported in the asset system. Now, we talked about the threshold for assets that are all assets. Now I'm getting specific here on this page with capital assets, and those are basically assets that are of greater cost, greater value. Okay, again, we're back to the equipment, the tangible personal property. And if a piece of equipment is greater than $15,000, it needs to be recorded just like it would if it was greater than $1,000, but it needs to be coded as a capital asset. And so you see there in red, for the Oaks users, they need to put a C on the end of that 3609 because that profile ID, 3609C, the C represents a capital asset, and then that asset gets recorded and it goes to OBM at the end of the fiscal year, and it goes into the CAFR report, which is the state's financial package. So it's very important that if you have equipment that's greater than $15,000, that you code it with a capital identifier for the Oaks users. Okay, so that then the same thing. We're going back down to the software. Software again. Software is required if it's over $100,000, and if it is, then you need to have it recorded with a profile of a C for Oaks users. There's your land, regardless of the cost. There's the profile ID for land. You have your easements as well with 9050C for easements regardless of the cost. Then the land improvements, again, they're 15,000, but you need to record them with 9600C as an example. We have many different Oaks land improvement profile IDs. These ones in red are just one example. Okay, then when you get to buildings. Now, buildings, to be a capital asset, a building has to be $15,000 or more. And right away, people are thinking, wait a minute, every building's greater than 15,000. And I say this every year, there's still a handful of agencies that have these modular buildings. They're kind of like sheds, and they're considered a building, but the total cost didn't even cost. It's not even 15,000. So some of these really small type sheds would not be a capital asset because their cost doesn't go for a building doesn't meet 15,000. But most 99% of the buildings are definitely over that. And the same thing goes for the renovations. Again, the renovations, if it's more than 100,000, it should have the proper profile ID in Oaks to show it's a capital asset. Now, licensed vehicles, and I'll probably say this again. Right now, licensed vehicles are not put in Oaks. Okay, they go in Fleet, Ohio. The only records now, unlicensed vehicles, definitely like gators and golf carts and things that are unlicensed, those do go in Oaks. But licensed vehicles are not recorded in Oaks AM. What we do now with the folks in Fleet is we record the lease contracts in Oaks. And basically that is for OBM and for that CAFR report that they produce every year. Okay, so any licensed vehicle that you guys own would be in Fleet, Ohio. Anything that you lease from a company or you lease from DAS, that would still be in Fleet, Ohio's system. It would not be in Oaks. They are number 8 with infrastructure. There are only 2 agencies that report their infrastructure, and that's DNR and ODOT. And they have to report anything from bridges and dams to roads and sewer systems and tunnels, things like that. And those are regardless of the cost for infrastructure records, and and most of those are pretty big items anyway. There I mentioned about the licensed vehicles, so I won't go through that again. So now we're on page 14, and I'm going pretty quickly. Okay, so again, if you have a question about something, please raise your hand and we'll stop and see if we can help you. I'm at the top of page 14 right now, and this topic is on tagging assets. And some agencies, sometimes their supervisors, in my opinion, go a little overboard, and they try to tag like laptop cases and calculators and really small items, like small value items that don't meet the cost threshold. And what happens is then you're opening yourself up to more items that are subject to an audit, because as soon as you place a barcode tag on an item, then that means that item has to go in Oaks. Okay, anything that's tagged is fair game for an auditor to go down a hallway and say, oh, that's tagged. Okay, show me where that is on your year-end report, or show me where that is right now in the asset system. Okay, so one of the other options, instead of putting a barcode tag on a low dollar amount item, instead of a barcode tag, is to put a state of Ohio property label. Okay, and those are, those don't have the barcode, they don't have the numbering system. It basically just says property of state of Ohio, and it might say Attorney General Office or something like that, but it does not have any numbers or barcodes on it. that would be an option for those low dollar amount items. And then the second portion of that section with where it says barcodes must have an agency name and or division or institution printed on it. Recognizable abbreviations can replace the agency, division, or institution. One of the things that we've dealt with this year, in just this fiscal year 20, is we've spoken to the administrator with state printing, and she's informed us that she has a process in place to help agencies who need to reorder their barcode tags. So if you contact state printing, you can get them to go through the entire process with you to get you the best price for as many items and make sure that everything's in the proper format. And all you basically would need to tell them is how many you want, maybe what color, and what number did you leave off with, so that you don't want to duplicate your asset tag numbers. But if you knew what your last tag is going to be, you can just start with the next sequential number. But I would definitely seek help through state printing. But now with interagency transfers, the biggest thing, now this is interagency. So this isn't one division sending it to another or one department sending some equipment to another department. This is going to a totally different agency, okay? And the first thing you must do is contact state and federal surplus, okay? Contacting surplus, you need to get approval from them. And I would say almost all the time they approve it, unless it's a really high need item that they want to sell at their auction. They have the legal right to do that, but I believe almost every time they will approve the transfer to the other agency. Okay, once you get approval from them, then you use the form that is on the asset management on our website. It's an ADM 1448. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's pretty easy to use. And all you do is you put in the assets that you want transferred. And then you email us that report along with emailing the receiving agency person of contact. Then that person has to reply to the email saying, yes, we want those assets transferred. Once we get that, then we can go into Oaks. Michelle or I have access to go into Oaks, and we'll actually do the transfer. Folks at the agencies who use Oaks EM do not have access to transfer or change a business unit on a record. But we have access to all business units here, so we can do that for you. Next section here on custodians for shared equipment. And this changed a year or so ago. State agencies are permitted to assign an organizational identifier as the custodian for shared personal property. An organizational identifier could be a division, a department, a unit, or section of an organization. And then a few examples are general services division, maintenance, tech team, real estate, capital projects, server team, and user support. That's for shared equipment. Now, if an employee uses certain equipment and they're the only ones that use it, then they should be the custodian. So like, for an example, I'm the custodian for my PC. Okay, I'm the only one that uses the PC, and if it goes somewhere, I need to be aware of it. Right now, in our organization, in DAS, IT technically is responsible for the IT equipment, but I'm still the custodian of it because I use it every day. Okay, so that's the difference between some equipment that only one person is responsible for and they use it every day versus a copier or a big printer or something where everybody uses it and it's not not one person's responsibility. Now, this next section I had mentioned that we put in here, even though it's only really for Oaks users, but we get a lot of questions on this. New people who are given the responsibility of doing inventory and recording assets in Oaks. Each agency has an Oaks security designee. It's someone who, and some of the larger agencies have multiple people that have this designee, where they can create. They go right into Oaks and they create the employee's access to be able to use the asset management module. Michelle and I here in Asset Management Services, we don't have access to create anyone's Oaks security profile. We can't create our own. Okay, but we get a lot of questions, people saying I need access, and they think that we can do that, and we cannot. It's always at the agency level. So I just wanted to go ahead and make that clear since I had a lot of folks on the line here. Now, the depreciation and the importance of the accuracy. An asset should begin depreciating based on the date the asset is placed into service. Usually that's the date you receive it. There are examples of assets that get purchased in bulk, especially computers and laptops, where the IT shop has to do something to those computers before they get disseminated. Okay, so they may be in a warehouse or an office or something for a little while before they get put into service. When you're entering in Oaks AM, an asset begins to depreciate based off the date entered in the transaction date field. That's the key, the transaction date field. So let's say you received something 2 months ago, and you're just now entering it into Oaks or an internal asset system if you use that. If I'm going in today, November 20th, 2019, the transaction date in Oaks should not be 11/20/2019. The transaction date should be the date the asset goes into service. So if you receive something and it was put into service immediately 2 months ago, then you should use September 20th as your date in the transaction date. Then you have September and October of 2 months of depreciation, which should be counted in this fiscal year. Okay, and this gets real important when you start talking about servers and capital assets that get reported to OBM. We should be accounting for the depreciation as soon as it's put in service. So technically, with all assets, unless you receive something, put it into service, and enter it the same day, that's the only time that transaction date in Oaks would be today's date. It's usually a date before today. So it's very important that transaction date is accurate for depreciation purposes. The next section here on selling a service weapon to retirees. Okay, and basically this is a collective bargaining agreement, and it's with the State of Ohio Unit 2 Association. And I pretty much want to go to the next page here on page 15. And it says at the top of page 15, employees shall be sold their service weapon at the initial purchase price less 20% depreciation each year until the remaining price is $1. Okay, so basically, if the agency agrees to sell the service weapon to the retiree, they would pay $1 usually, unless it's a newer weapon, and then they've got to figure out the calculation based off of 20% depreciation every year. But most of the time, from what I've heard, is that these are fully depreciated assets, and you sell it to them for $1. Now, it is definitely up to the agency to decide, because it says right there, unless the retirement is for reasons of psychological disability, well, then they're not going to sell you the weapon, right? They're not going to sell you a weapon if you have psychological issues. But there is a link that I included, and it's the draft of this. It's a legislative draft that covers from 2018 to 2021. And if you need to, see specifics, when you click on this link, you would go to page 71, section 2905, and that would help you. And you can give that to your legal folks and show them as well if there's any question about selling a service weapon to a retiree. Very last section here is on trade-ins, and whether it's and this could be trade-in under warranty, because when you trade an asset in, a lot of agencies want to keep the same record and just change the tag number and the serial number, but that really shouldn't be the case. You really should retire the current asset record and create a new record for the new item, even if it's the identical thing, same model. It's going to have, obviously it's going to have a different serial number, but the key here is the depreciation, right? If something's depreciated for a while, and now you're bringing in a new one, the new depreciation date should be the date that the new asset was put into service. So you must retire the old asset and create a new record so everything's clean and depreciation is smooth and accurate. Now, I've went through and spoke for 42 minutes straight, and it's really boring stuff. And I haven't seen or heard any questions. Michelle, have you seen any questions?
No questions. No hands were raised.
Okay. So that means I was perfectly clear on everything, and everybody knows everything, which is great. Now, if you think of something later, you can call or email us. And again, if you have coworkers who are who wanted to go through this, we have one.
We got one. Eddie
Okay.
Westbrook. I'm going to unmute him. Eddie, you can speak. Hello, Eddie.
Well,
Ed, I don't hear
that
him.
was a mistake. Okay. All right. So okay. So if no one has any other questions, what we'll do is we'll wrap this up for today. Everybody who was on the call will get credit for participating. The go-to site will show us exactly the time you signed in and the time you signed out. So if there's some folks that signed in and 5 minutes later they signed out, that's not really going to be getting credit for a 45-minute presentation. But just know that nobody's going to come after you, but we will monitor the agency participation, and we're hopeful in a couple days we will have those the new recording out there on our Asset Management Services website. And if you're not sure how to go to our website, all you need to do is go into DAS and then go to Divisions and choose General Services Division. Once you choose General Services Division, you will see Asset Management Services, and then our
Fred,
webinar is down on the right-hand side. Yes.
Fred, someone has a question. Marcia Tile, she actually wrote this question in. She said, for the transaction date, do you use the date the item is received or the date it is in service? Like you said, sometimes it takes weeks to get the computers updated and in service.
It is, yes. The The tran date should be the date that the item goes into service. Now, I'll give you a little trick here, because if you don't know when it's going into service, but yet you know you have it, you can enter the record and you can put the transaction date as a future date. And what I mean by that is something way out. Okay, so let's say November 20th of 2025. Okay, the problem is now you got to monitor that, because then you got to find out when those assets actually go into service, and then you have to go into Oaks and change the in-service date. Okay, and if that happens, just give us a call. We'll walk you through that, because then you would change the in-service date to that 2025 date back to the date that it really went. So that way, while you're waiting, there's no depreciation occurring at all. The asset will not depreciate with a 2025 transaction date. And then when you do find out when those PCs or laptops get disseminated, you can go ahead and change the in-service date to the accurate date. That's a good question. Any other questions?
Sequel, can you hear? I unmuted you. Oh. She's doesn't hear me. Okay. So far, that's it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, everyone. Thanks for participating, and you guys have a great day. Thank you.